Welcome to this week's piece. So I found this lovely little chest on Marketplace and I obviously had to pick it up. It did have a bit of water damage on this side here. It kind of ran down over the edge. So we've got a bit of failing finish kind of all over the place, a little scuff mark on the edge there, and some of the trim has some missing bits, but it's a really strong piece. It's got great lines and it's structurally sound. So there was really nothing repair wise that needed to be done to this. So that's awesome. So obviously I started by taking off the hardware and giving it a good clean. Since I didn't need anything too crazy, I just used my chalk mountain cleaner with a scrubby pad, and then for the detail work I went in with a scrub brush to kind of get down in there. You can use an old toothbrush, or these are just one of the packs of little brushes that the dollar store has. I use those all the time for those crazy details. And then the top I was just going to sand back. So I had to be a little extra careful on the side with water damage because it was raised a little bit, and this is a veneer, so I just had to be a little careful around that area. I was doing it very gingerly, and I didn't do anything too aggressive on it. And then I just went up in my grits until we had a smooth finish. And as I'm running along through these sanding discs, I kind of go through and check it. You can kind of see like weird little swirls that will start happening. So you can take either a screwdriver or just anything that has a flat edge and kind of bust off the little pieces of buildup that get stuck on there from the finish. And you can also use a stiff bristled brush to kind of brush off the extra dust, and it will help kind of preserve how many discs you have to use while you're sanding down a top. You do have to change them out when you're going through an entire finish, and it's to be expected, but you can get a little bit more use out of them if you're brushing it off and popping off those little bits of finish as you go. And once this is all done, I was going to go in with my light brown oil stain. And then as soon as I put it on, it just wasn't the color that I had envisioned. I really liked how light the top was originally. And so I'm putting it on, I'm like, it's pretty, but it's not where I want to be at. So then I mixed a little bit of the white oil stain over the top just to kind of tone it down some and see where we were at there. And still not exactly where I wanted it to be. So then I just went ahead and wiped that all back and went in full strength with the white oil stain. That's kind of what I love about these stains, is there's no waiting time. If you don't like it, you can just fix it immediately, which is awesome. So what you do with this is let it sit on here. This is at full strength, and I will just leave it on overnight to let it fully penetrate. And then after you leave it on overnight, you come back and wipe off the excess oil and see where you're at. So this is what it looked like the next morning when I came in. You can see that it absorbs down into the wood, the grain starts popping back through. So I'm going through, wiping back the excess oil, and I'm going to do a second coat of the white. And then it's just the same process. I put it on and then leave it overnight and wipe back the extra. And now I'm going to go through and give this a scuff sand. These are the Chalk Mountain angled sponges. They are awesome for these detailed parts because you can take the really sharp angle on it and get it down in the grooves and everything to make sure that you're getting off all the failing finish. So long as your finish is staying on when you go over it with the sanding sponge, you're going to be fine. But any of the parts where it's loose or coming up, you want to make sure that you give that a really good work over so that you have something smooth to lay your paint over. So that's what I'm doing, going over this entire piece with the sanding sponge because it contours to everything. And I don't have $1 million for a surf prep, but one day, folks, one day. And then I'm going to just wipe that back with a baby wipe. if you don't know this, I keep like a lifetime supply of baby wipes in my shop because they're just necessary for all the things. And since this piece was a dark wood and we did have some failing finish, that means some of the wood is going to have tannins leaking through, and I don't want to have to deal with that later. So I'm just going to prime it with my 123 primer. I always use the gray one because it's a light enough gray that you can paint light colors over, and it's the best one, if I'm being honest. So it's the one that I always use. It's always in my Amazon links. It's grand. It's water-based, so it's not super stinky. You don't really have to worry about it, and it does a good job. Now, if you have something that's like a crazy super bleeder, this isn't going to, you're going to need either several coats of this or you're going to have to use an oil-based. I typically will almost always use several coats of this, or I will use shellac just to cover up an area, but this usually does the job just fine. So I'm going over the vast majority of it with this little roller, and then I'll take a chip brush and go in and hit all the detail parts to make sure that I get primer in all those areas as well. And now for the fun part. So I found this tissue paper on Amazon and I loved it, and it's been sitting in my wish list for a while. I just load that thing up whenever I see something that I want but don't necessarily need, and that way for like inspiration on certain things I can just kind of run through it and see if there's anything cool on there that I found when I was going down a rabbit hole. And I did. So I grabbed this and I was like, you know what, we're gonna try this out on here. So things that I loved about this tissue paper: it was huge, so you can use large areas. However, it did have a bit of a bleeding issue, which was fine for this piece, but if it's something that you don't want any bleeding of the inks or anything, then I definitely wouldn't recommend it for like a really pristine piece. Like if you just wanted this to show and have it be crisp white everywhere, I don't think it would be a great paper for that. But since I'm using this for a blended finish, this is going to work just fine, and I was okay with it. So every tissue paper is kind of different, and not even just tissue paper, but any of the decoupage papers that I work they're all different, and they kind of require a different application. Now you can use a lot of the same tricks for all of them. This one was a little bit more finicky than some of the others I used, and I was going on a curved surface, so it was a bit more of a pain. So this first section I put on sideways and went through and tried to go slowly, because slowly typically is the best way to go for this. But in this case, it was not. So I kind of went through, and I'm not terribly concerned about wrinkles. You guys know that. I don't care about them because it's usually fine, and most of them ease their way out once the paper dries. But if you want a super smooth finish, this paper in particular was much easier. I did a thin strip along the top instead of doing it sideways over. I did it along the top and put it down quickly. So I did a strip along the top and then used my hand and smoothed it down quickly on all the other sides, and it went much faster, and I had a lot less rippling in the finish when I was done. So if you happen to want to get this paper, that is what I recommend. Start with a smooth strip and then quickly run it down over your poly after you get it on. Because that one little strip of poly that you do at the top will hold the paper there so that you can then lift it up, add the rest of your poly down underneath, and then smooth it down. I'm going to kind of show you right here, but I didn't fully have the technique on this second one yet. But this is where I learned what I needed to do. So see that one little strip there, and then I just adhere the paper in, and then add all the rest of the poly, and then smoothed it down with my hands. And then I will go over the top of this paper with the brush and more poly immediately, because I'm going to use the brush to kind of smooth it out even more. And so if you take your brush and don't use the tips of the bristles, that will tear your paper. But if you lay your brush almost flat when you're smoothing out, you can use the brush tips when you're putting on the poly, that's fine. But when you're using it kind of like a brayer to smooth out your paper, if you leave it very flat with the surface, you can use it to smooth out your paper and it won't tear if you're gentle. I mean, you might get some tears. I don't want to say that you won't get tears, but if you're just very gentle, very gingerly, lay it super on its side, you can get a really smooth finish and it will smooth out all your wrinkles. So anyways, we're going to go on, get all these papers on here, and then leave these overnight because I cut them slightly larger. So I have 2 straight edges on all the sides. I made sure the 2 straight edges went in perfectly, and then the 2 other sides were slightly overlapped outside. And I'll leave this overnight, and then we'll come back in with a blade and cut those off. Okay, now we're going to get into the blend. And these blends are so fun and so easy to do. I super recommend them for people who are intimidated by blending because you almost can't mess it up. So I'm starting in with Woodland Harbor, and this is just, it's a rich brown that has kind of like a purpley undertone, so it was perfect for this paper. And when I'm choosing colors for my papers, I literally just look at the main colors that I want to kind of have pop out and go in with them, and I match them up along with those areas. So I've got Woodland Harbor, I've got Plum, and I have Devonshire Cream, and then I have a custom sage looking blend that I have mixed up, and I just almost always have it mixed up. So it's just kind of a sagey green color. And so I put these around the paper where it kind of matches where it would be going. And you can see I'm literally just throwing it on here. And I'm kind of putting it in the right spots where I think it should go or where I think it would look good. You see nothing is blended out, nothing is perfect. It's all kind of just thrown on. And that's okay. Remember, everything looks worse before it gets better. And you just trust the process. And so I say this in a lot of my videos because most people are just terrified of blending, but it's so easy if you just trust it. Just trust that it's going to take a minute, but if you give it time and work around it, you're going to be okay. So I use my dark khaki, which is exactly that. It's like a dark khaki color. It's kind of the base color that I'm going to use to blend all the other colors together. So I just take it and it's on the Chalk Mountain small brush, and this is my new favorite brush for blending right now. You know how you get favorites and they kind of just go all over the place? This one is my current blending favorite brush. So it's just really feathery, soft, and light, and it just does a great job. And so I'm blending all those colors around the edges, and then also I'm not afraid to go over the papers with them. So I'm going over in the blank spots between the florals and getting that on the papers so it looks like it belongs in with the paint. So you're not just getting a shock of paint around a piece of, you know, the paper in the middle. It's kind of all flowing together and looking like they're supposed to be together. And a lot of these colors are stronger than the paper is because the paper is more subdued, 1 because it's tissue paper and 2 because we put it over a base of gray. So these will get toned down too as we're using the khaki color to kind of mute everything as it goes in. And since the tissue papers are all sealed, I keep my baby wipes out, and anywhere that I think is too heavy with paint, I'll go over it with the wipe and just wipe it back, and it's fully sealed so you don't have to worry about messing it up. You can just totally wipe it back, and if you want to add more paint, you can. If you want to take away paint, take it away. It's just a process, and you go back and forth until you love it. Now for this top section, I took a small detail brush with a bit of the Devonshire Cream on it. That way there's not a huge transition between the colored base and the white stain top. So I just take this, and since the trim was very intricate, I made sure that my paint was watered down. If it started to get a little too hard to get into those details, I just add a little spritz of water and it'd go right down in there, and it was just fine. And then once I had that fully covered and in all the details, I could take my little blending brush that already had the paint on it from blending out the rest of the piece, and I kind of just swooshed it gently over the top to tone it down and to tone it into the base, but also kept it much lighter to kind of go with the top. And then I just sealed the entire piece with poly. Now the top, since I did the oil stain on it, I did make sure that that set for, it had 2 nights to go over. You might be able to do it in less than 2 nights. I just feel comfortable letting it sit for 2 nights and then being able to poly over the top of it. I also make sure that there is no oil coming up on a rag so that I'm not, messing up, because my poly is water-based. You can mix oil and water products. You just have to make sure that they're fully dry before you do so. So that's what I do, and I've not had any issues with it. But again, I do let it sit for that extra day before I put it on there. The rest of the piece, everything's water-based, so it can just be, a couple hours after it's dry and you can fully seal it in poly. Okay, so I'm going to go in with my rose gold gilding wax, and typically I use a gilding wax that is a contrasting color to what I'm using. So if I have a cool toned piece, I'll typically go in with a warm toned gilding wax because I think it gives it just more of a pop. But in this case, I just felt like it was so almost monochromatic, even though we have several colors in it. I just thought that this would kind of just blend so well into the piece, but also make it shine, so that's what I did.
Oh hi, Taryn here with Elegant Upgrades with a little cap. We are showing you this week's piece, which is just beautiful, so lovely. I adore it. I have no idea what style it would even be called. It's just very romantic and feminine. I doubt you'd see this in a lot of men's studies, but I adore it. I think it's beautiful. So before we get into some photos, let's go over the winner for the 5K giveaway, which is Jennifer Lawrence. I will throw up the little image right here so that you can see the spelling and everything like that. Jennifer, if you see this, message me on this video, just leave a comment and then I'll talk to you via there and then we'll get everything sorted. If you do not answer within 3 days, I will then pick a new winner and we will go from there and try again. So yeah, that's it, this week's piece. This last week's winner for the 5K giveaway, because you guys are awesome and got me to 5K and we are already above and beyond that now, so that's super exciting. You guys are just the absolute best. Thank you so much. You say thank you too?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next week.
That was so great.
It was so great.
Actually, we don't have to do it again.
We don't?
No.
Okay.
I'll sit back.
Okay.